She stood there in her grandmother's pearls, watching the woman who was supposed to welcome her into the family destroy everything she'd dreamed of. And in that moment, surrounded by 250 guests, she made a choice that would change 3 families forever. This is the story of how one wedding ceremony became a battleground, and how silence became the loudest weapon of all. The chapel was filled that Saturday afternoon in August, decorated with white roses and gold ribbons streaming from every pew. Brianna had spent 18 months planning this day. 18 months choosing colors and tasting cakes. 18 months imagining the moment she'd walk down that aisle toward Devon, the man who'd held her through her father's death, who'd learned to braid her niece's hair, who'd proposed to her in the same park where they'd had their first date 3 years earlier. But tradition demands more than love. It demands approval. And Devon's mother, Patricia, had never given hers. The morning started wrong. Brianna noticed it in the getting ready suite when her maid of honor, Jasmine, came back from greeting guests with worry creasing her forehead. Patricia had arrived wearing cream. Not beige, not champagne, but a dress so close to white it might as well have been the bride's. When Brianna's mother saw it, her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. In their community, you didn't start drama on wedding days. You smiled through it, dealt with it later, kept the peace. That was the rule Brianna had been raised with. The rule she'd followed her entire life, even when following it hurt. Devon's family came from old money, the kind that whispered rather than shouted, that controlled through raised eyebrows and strategic silence. Patricia had been the first black woman on the board of 3 major corporations. She'd built a reputation on being formidable, unshakable, perfect. And she'd raised her only son with the same expectations. Private schools. Ivy League education. A carefully curated social circle. When Devon brought Brianna home 2 years ago, Patricia's smile never reached her eyes. Brianna was a social worker from the West Side. Her mother cleaned houses. Her father had driven trucks before the cancer took him. She didn't speak French or play tennis. She hadn't summered anywhere. And though Patricia never said it directly, Brianna felt the judgment in every interaction, every subtle correction, every time Patricia mentioned how close Devon had been to Veronica, his college girlfriend whose parents owned a vineyard in Napa. Before we continue deeper into what happened that day, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The ceremony was supposed to start at 4. By 3:45 something felt wrong. Devon stood at the altar with his groomsmen, tugging at his bow tie, glancing back toward the entrance every few seconds. The pastor made small talk trying to ease the tension. In the bride's room, Brianna's hands shook as she held her bouquet. Jasmine kept checking her phone. Finally, at 3:50 one of the ushers knocked. Patricia was refusing to be seated. She was standing in the vestibule, surrounded by her sisters and Devon's aunts, speaking in that low, controlled voice that somehow carried anyway. Brianna's mother volunteered to go speak with her. She came back 5 minutes later, her brown skin flushed darker with anger she was fighting to contain. Patricia had demands. She wanted the ceremony shortened. She wanted certain family members moved to different seats. She wanted the unity candle ceremony removed because it wasn't traditional enough. And she wanted to speak before the vows. To give what she called a blessing, though everyone knew it would be anything but. Devon found out when his cousin whispered the situation to his best man. He left the altar, which guests later said they'd never seen before. You don't abandon your post at your own wedding. But Devon walked down that aisle and disappeared into the vestibule, and for 10 minutes, raised voices echoed through the closed doors. When he emerged, his face was stone. He returned to his position, nodded to the pastor, and the music finally began. But everyone in that chapel knew something had broken. You could feel it like electricity before a storm. Brianna walked down the aisle on her uncle's arm, her mother having walked before her, tears already streaming down both their faces. The dress fit perfectly, vintage lace her grandmother had worn, altered to fit Brianna's frame. She'd imagined this moment so many times. Devon's face when he first saw her. The way his eyes would light up. The smile that made her feel like the only woman in the world. But when their eyes met, she saw something else. Exhaustion. Resignation. And behind it, barely hidden, a flash of anger that made her stomach drop. Patricia sat in the front row, her cream dress catching the light, her face arranged in what someone who didn't know her might mistake for serenity. But Brianna had learned to read that face. The slight tightness around her mouth. The way her hands gripped her clutch. The angle of her chin. Patricia was waiting. The pastor began the ceremony. Words about love and commitment floated through the chapel, beautiful and hollow. Devon held Brianna's hands, but his grip was different. mechanical. They'd written their own vows, spent weeks perfecting them. When it came time for Devon to speak, he opened his mouth and hesitated. Just for a second. Just long enough for doubt to fill the space. Before he could speak, Patricia stood. The chapel went silent. Even the pastor froze. She didn't ask for permission. She simply stepped into the aisle and began to walk toward them, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. Devon's father, sitting beside where Patricia had been, reached out to stop her, but she was already moving. She reached the altar, positioned herself between the bride and groom, and turned to face the congregation. Can you imagine standing there in your wedding dress, while someone else commands the moment that's supposed to be yours? Can you picture the faces of 250 people all turned toward you, waiting to see what you'll do? How you'll respond? Will you fight or fold? Patricia spoke for 3 minutes. She talked about family legacy, about the importance of knowing your place, about how marriage wasn't just between two people but between families, and how families had standards, expectations, requirements. She never mentioned Brianna's name, never looked at her. But every word was a blade, carefully aimed. She talked about Devon's father, about how she'd had to prove herself worthy of their family, about sacrifice and duty. She made it sound like wisdom, like a blessing. But beneath the pretty words was a message everyone understood. Brianna wasn't good enough, would never be good enough, and this marriage was happening over Patricia's resistance, not with her approval. The pastor tried to intervene, gently suggesting they continue with the ceremony. Patricia ignored him. She turned to Devon, placed her hand on his cheek with theatrical tenderness, and said the words that would shatter everything. I raised you to make decisions I could be proud of. I hope today you'll remember who you are and where you come from. Then she returned to her seat, her sisters nodding approval, her husband staring at his hands. The silence that followed was suffocating. Devon stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions too fast to name. Shame, anger, confusion, loyalty warring with love. Brianna watched him, still holding her bouquet, feeling 250 pairs of eyes on her back, waiting for her reaction. The old Brianna would have smiled through it, would have continued the ceremony, kept the peace, dealt with it later. The old Brianna would have swallowed the humiliation and told herself love was enough, that Devon would eventually stand up to his mother, that time would fix this. But standing there in her grandmother's pearls and her grandmother's lace, Brianna suddenly saw her future. Years of holidays where she'd be tolerated but never welcomed. Children whose grandmother would love them conditionally the way she loved Devon. A husband who would always be caught between two families, never fully choosing either. A life spent proving herself worthy to someone who'd already decided she wasn't. She saw it all in crystal clarity, and something inside her that had been bending for 2 years finally snapped. She lowered her bouquet. The movement was small, but in that silent chapel, it was deafening. She looked at Devon, really looked at him, and waited for him to speak. To defend her. To tell his mother she was wrong. To choose. The seconds stretched. Devon opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and said nothing. That's when Brianna set her bouquet on the altar and walked away. Not ran. Not stormed. She walked with her head high, her train trailing behind her, past the shocked faces of her family and friends, past Patricia's satisfied expression, past the pastor's outstretched hand, through the chapel doors and into the vestibule. Behind her, chaos erupted. Jasmine and the bridesmaids hurried after her. Devon finally moved, calling her name. Guests stood, unsure whether to follow or stay. Patricia remained seated, but her satisfaction began to crumble as she realized what was happening. Brianna wasn't causing a scene. She wasn't fighting or crying or begging. She was simply leaving. And somehow, that was more powerful than any confrontation could have been. In the bride's room, Brianna stood in front of the mirror, looking at herself in the wedding dress she'd dreamed about since childhood. Jasmine burst in, followed by Brianna's mother and aunts. They expected tears. Expected her to need comfort, to be talked down, to be convinced to go back. Instead, Brianna was calm. Eerily calm. She asked Jasmine to help her out of the dress. Her mother grabbed her hands, asking what she was doing, if she was sure, reminding her that everyone was waiting. Brianna's response was simple. I'm not marrying into a family that doesn't want me. And I'm not marrying a man who won't defend me. Her voice didn't shake, didn't rise. She spoke like someone who'd finally stopped fighting gravity and decided to let go. Think about this for a moment. If you were Brianna, what would you have done? Would you have gone through with the ceremony, hoping love would conquer the dysfunction? Would you have confronted Patricia directly? Or would you have done exactly what Brianna did, Choosing self-respect over the dream you'd spent years building? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Devon appeared in the doorway, his face stricken. He'd been crying. His groomsmen hovered behind him, uncomfortable witnesses to this implosion. He begged Brianna to come back. Promised it would be different. Said he'd talk to his mother, set boundaries, make things right. But Brianna asked him one question. Why didn't you do that when she was speaking? Why didn't you stop her? Devon had no answer. Or rather, he had excuses. His mother was difficult. This was how she was. She'd come around eventually. He loved Brianna. Wasn't that enough? And that's when Brianna said the words that would be repeated at dinner tables across Atlanta for months afterward. Love without protection isn't love. It's just hope that someone will eventually choose you. And I'm done hoping. She changed into jeans and a t-shirt someone had brought from her apartment. She removed her makeup, twisted her hair into a bun, and walked out of that chapel through the side door, leaving behind 250 guests, a groom, and a dream. Jasmine drove her home while text messages and calls exploded their phones. The story spread instantly. Social media caught fire. Some people called Brianna dramatic. Said she'd overreacted. Said Patricia was just being protective. Said Brianna should have been more understanding of family dynamics. But others saw it differently. Saw a woman who'd been disrespected publicly and chose dignity over desperation. Saw someone who recognized that marriage to Devon meant a lifetime of fighting Patricia for basic respect. Saw strength in walking away from what wasn't meant for her, even when walking away hurt. Devon called 47 times that first night. Left voicemails ranging from apologetic to angry to desperate. His father called too, surprisingly. Apologized for his wife, for his son, for the whole mess. Said he'd tried to stop Patricia earlier, but she never listened. Said he'd failed his son by teaching him to keep peace at any cost. The honesty was surprising but changed nothing. Over the following days, pieces of the story emerged. Patricia had been working for months to stop the wedding. She'd offered Devon a trust fund bonus if he postponed it. When that didn't work, she tried to convince him Brianna was after his money. She'd hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on Brianna's family and found nothing except hard-working people who'd faced hardship with dignity. She'd even contacted Veronica, the ex-girlfriend, trying to orchestrate a reunion. Every tactic had failed, so she'd resorted to public humiliation, banking on Brianna being too polite, too intimidated, too invested in the dream to fight back. Patricia had miscalculated. She'd assumed Brianna's background meant she'd accept poor treatment to access a better life. She'd confused kindness for weakness, grace for desperation. And when Brianna walked away, Patricia's victory turned hollow. Because Devon, who'd never stood up to his mother before, finally broke. 3 days after the wedding that wasn't, he moved out of his apartment and into a hotel. Refused his mother's calls. Told his father he needed time. The family that Patricia had tried to protect by keeping Brianna out was fracturing anyway, and this time it was her fault. 6 weeks later, Brianna ran into Devon at a coffee shop. The encounter was awkward, painful, and necessary. He'd lost weight. Looked older. He told her he'd been in therapy, working through years of enmeshment with his mother. Recognizing patterns he'd been blind to. He didn't ask her to take him back. Didn't make promises. He just apologized. Really apologized, taking full responsibility for his failure to protect her, for putting his mother's feelings above hers, for asking her to accept treatment he never should have tolerated. It was the conversation Brianna had needed, even though it couldn't fix what was broken. She thanked him. Told him she hoped he'd find healing. And meant it. Because her anger had faded into something more complex. Understanding, maybe. Or just the recognition that hurt people, and Devon had been hurt long before she met him. Brianna threw herself into work, into therapy of her own, into rebuilding the confidence Patricia had tried to destroy. Her clients at the community center noticed the change in her. She was fiercer now. More willing to push back against systems that devalued people. More insistent that her clients demand respect rather than accept scraps. Walking away from Devon had taught her something crucial. Sometimes love isn't the problem and staying isn't the solution. Sometimes the loving thing is to refuse to participate in your own diminishment. Her mother worried about her being alone. But Brianna wasn't alone. She had friends who'd supported her decision. She had work that mattered. She had a future that belonged entirely to her, shaped by her choices rather than someone else's approval. 8 months after the wedding, Brianna's story took another turn. Devon reached out with an unusual request. His parents were divorcing. Patricia's control had finally driven her husband to leave. In the aftermath, Patricia had collapsed. Not physically but emotionally. The armor she'd worn for decades had cracked, and beneath it was a frightened woman who'd confused control with love, who'd pushed away everyone who mattered. She was in therapy now, confronting the trauma from her own childhood that had made her believe vulnerability was weakness. And she wanted to apologize to Brianna. Devin wasn't asking Brianna to forgive her or even to meet with her. He was just passing along the message, leaving the choice with Brianna. It took 3 weeks for Brianna to decide. She agreed to meet Patricia in a neutral space, a park bench near the botanical gardens. Patricia looked different. Smaller somehow, despite being the same physical size. Her hair was grayer. Her clothes less polished. She didn't make excuses. Didn't explain herself away. She simply acknowledged what she'd done and why. Fear. Patricia had clawed her way up from nothing, built an empire of respectability, and lived in constant terror of it crumbling. She'd projected that fear onto Devin's choices, convinced herself that anything outside her control was a threat. She'd seen Brianna's background and assumed Brianna couldn't understand the pressure, the stakes, the performance required to maintain their position. She'd been wrong about everything. Brianna listened. Didn't interrupt. When Patricia finished, Brianna spoke her truth. Explained the pain of being judged not for who she was but for where she came from. The humiliation of that wedding day. The grief of losing not just Devin but the future she'd imagined. And beneath it all, the relief of escaping a lifetime of trying to earn acceptance from someone determined not to give it. Patricia cried. Real tears, not the controlled kind she'd perfected for boardrooms. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply said she understood if Brianna hated her. Brianna's response surprised them both. She didn't hate Patricia. She pitied her. Because Patricia had sacrificed connection for control and was only now, at 63, realizing the cost. They didn't become friends. Didn't have tearful reconciliations or healing journeys together. But they did reach a kind of peace. Patricia sent a card on Brianna's birthday 6 months later. Just a card, no money, no elaborate gesture. Inside she'd written, I'm learning that being strong doesn't mean standing alone. Thank you for teaching me that even though I made you pay too high a price for the lesson. Brianna kept the card. Not because she'd forgiven everything but because healing is complicated, and people are more than their worst moments. Devin and Brianna never got back together. Too much had broken that couldn't be repaired. But they did eventually become something like friends. Not close friends but people who could see each other at events without pain, who could acknowledge what they'd meant to each other without trying to resurrect what had died. Devin dated other women, learned to set boundaries with his mother, and slowly built a life that was his rather than hers. Brianna thrived. Got a promotion. Bought a house. Started teaching workshops on boundaries and self-worth. And when she did eventually fall in love again 2 years later, it was with someone who defended her from the start. Who introduced her to his family with pride. Who made her feel chosen rather than tolerated. The wedding that never happened taught Brianna something essential about herself. She was stronger than she'd known. Capable of walking away from everything she'd wanted when what she wanted required her to become smaller. The fantasy of the wedding, the marriage, the family had been beautiful. But it was built on a foundation that couldn't hold. And recognizing that, painful as it was, had saved her from years of trying to make herself fit into a space that was never meant for her. Some people called her story sad. A cautionary tale about families and dysfunction and love not being enough. But Brianna saw it differently. It was a story about knowing your worth. About refusing to negotiate yourself down to be acceptable. About understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop fighting for something that's destroying you. Patricia's journey was slower but equally significant. Therapy unpacked decades of armor. She reconnected with siblings she distanced herself from. She learned to apologize without defending herself. She slowly rebuilt a relationship with Devin based on respect rather than control. And she used her influence differently now, mentoring young black women not on how to fit into white spaces but on how to change those spaces entirely. She never stopped regretting that wedding day. The damage she'd caused. The happiness she'd destroyed. But she learned to sit with that regret without letting it consume her, to let it teach her rather than define her. If this story resonated with you, I need to know. Drop a comment telling me, would you have walked away like Brianna, or would you have stayed and fought? Have you ever had to choose between love and self-respect? Your story matters and I read every single comment. And while you're here, hit that like button if this story made you feel something. These are real experiences that need to be told, and your engagement helps more people find these stories. 3 years after that wedding day, Brianna was invited to speak at a women's conference about resilience and self-worth. In the audience, unannounced, sat Patricia. Brianna didn't know she was there until afterward, when Patricia approached with Devon beside her. The three of them stood in an awkward triangle, the past heavy between them. Patricia spoke first, telling Brianna she was proud of her. Proud of the woman who'd had the strength to walk away. Proud of the work she was doing. And proud, in a strange way, that she'd been part of Brianna's story, even if her role was that of the obstacle to overcome. Devon hugged Brianna, and for a moment, they were just two people who'd loved each other once and wished each other well now. Then they parted ways again, knowing some chapters close even as the story continues. Brianna's life moved forward. She married someone else eventually, in a small ceremony with just close friends and family. Her mother cried happy tears this time. There was no drama, no objections, no family power plays. Just love and celebration and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're with someone who sees you fully and chooses you completely. She thought about Devon sometimes. Wondered if he'd found that too. Hoped he had. Because despite everything, she didn't hate him. She just recognized that they'd been wrong for each other, and realizing that before legally binding themselves had been a gift, however painful the unwrapping. The question that haunted people who heard this story wasn't whether Brianna did the right thing. Most agreed she did. The question was why it took public humiliation for Devon to finally see what his mother was doing. Why love wasn't enough to make him defend his future wife. Why so many people stay in situations where they're barely tolerated, hoping that persistence will transform tolerance into acceptance. Brianna's answer when asked was always the same: we teach people what we'll accept. And for too long I accepted disrespect because I thought that's what love required. But love doesn't require you to shrink. Love expands you. And anything that makes you smaller isn't love at all. Years later, when Brianna told this story to her daughter, she didn't frame it as a tragedy. She framed it as the moment she learned to choose herself. The moment she discovered that dreams are only worth pursuing if they don't require you to abandon your dignity. Her daughter asked if she was sad about the wedding that never happened. Brianna thought about it, really thought, and realized she wasn't. Because that wedding would have led to a marriage built on her acceptance of unacceptable treatment. And the life she had now, earned through the courage to walk away, was infinitely better than the one she would have had if she'd stayed. The wedding that became a war taught everyone involved something different. Patricia learned that control isn't protection. Devon learned that staying silent is its own kind of betrayal. Brianna learned that her worth wasn't negotiable. And everyone watching learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is know when to stop fighting and start walking. That real strength isn't about enduring mistreatment. It's about recognizing it and refusing to accept it, even when refusal costs you everything you thought you wanted. If you made it to the end of this story, you're part of a community that believes in real talk about real issues. Show some love by hitting that subscribe button right now. Tap the notification bell so you never miss a story. Give this video a thumbs up if Brianna's courage inspired you. And most importantly, drop a comment sharing your own experience with family dynamics, impossible choices, or the moment you chose yourself. These conversations matter. Your voice matters. Let's keep this dialogue going because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that it's okay to walk away from what's hurting them, even if it looks beautiful from the outside. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember, you teach people how to treat you, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach them you're worth more than they're offering.